Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show that takes place right here in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Jake Friedman.
I'm Paul Salomon.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games. Joined by Paul Salomon today. Paul, what are we going to talk about in this episode?
Couple designers here. We're going to be talking about playtesting games, leading playtests as a designer, and playtesting other people's designs, and also touching on Stonemaier Design Day, which is an event that we both attended just yesterday.
Yesterday, as of recording this episode. So that's why
That's right.
kind of the playtesting unpublished prototypes is front of mind for us.
That's right. And is this your first year having a game of yours up for playtest there?
My second time. So this is my second year.
Yes, Chicken Wild.
Both times I brought games, and both time, and it's funny because I think I learned some lessons last time that I would have been better suited to have applied this time around. So, like in some ways, this episode is kind of like things to remember for next time. and then we can
Not
come
just
back.
Reflections. It's like, let me write this one down.
Yeah, and then we can come back and do this exact same episode next year, the day after Design Day, and be like,
That's smart. Should we start with a sort of an overview of the day? Maybe?
Yeah, let's
just
talk
to give
about
people a sense of what that is.
What it is, for sure.
Yeah. So I think Stonemaier Design Day is pretty old at this point. And there are some misconceptions about it that are important to correct. But first, I'll just say it's a day for gamers and game designers to come together to playtest unpublished designs, basically. It's similar to something like a proto spiel, except it's much smaller. It's probably much less open to the public in a way, and it's much more structured. So
I think that's the big piece. The Stonemaier team is there in full force. I think they had at least 3 people, Stonemaier employees there, helping make sure everything runs smoothly. They've rented out an entire venue, so the staff of that venue is there working hard to keep people fed and happy.
Exactly.
So that's the big distinction, right? It's everything is pre-scheduled, at least through breakfast to dinner. Every game is scheduled with a slot, and you have to sign up for it weeks, if not months, in advance to get in.
That's right.
Versus a proto spiel, which you just show up and you're like, I hope I could find some people who are willing to try out this thing.
I'll test your game, you test my game, maybe I'll leave, maybe I'll come back. Whereas this is like, there's a deadline for when you have to say that you have a game to play test. And then there's a time for people to sign up and those fill up. So like in the morning, typically there's 4 shorter sessions for, shorter 45, 30-minute games. In the afternoon, there's some longer ones that are like, I don't know, maybe even 2-hour sessions. And I was completely boxed out of the morning. Like it was just so full up that I just sort of walked around and saw other people's games and then just grabbed a table and play tested something I'm developing for Elf Creek. And then in the afternoon, like I said, there's longer games after lunch. I got to play a couple very cool games. So maybe we'll also get a chance to talk about what we actually played and what, we thought about them. I don't want to I don't know if anybody is keeping stuff on the hush-hush.
Yeah, I know. I feel a little funny about that. I think it is okay to kind of probably give like a broad overview of something we played, like the theme and kind of the mechanics that are happening in it. Maybe.
Yes. And I think one of the funny things about Design Day, which is also why I feel comfortable talking about this, is that there are ratings that occur. Like people rate their playtests to give feedback to the designers, but it is not a competition. However, the scores are published in numerical order, so to speak. Yes, you can't opt out.
As a designer, I can tell you that it's important to me. I think that, that's something I definitely care about. Like, it's an explicit part of my experience. Like when I'm teaching these games, it's like I hope these people give me a good score at the end of this playtest. And maybe that's just because I'm like a weirdo, competitive-oriented person.
I don't think it is.
But I'm trying to succeed on that metric
and I
this
think
event.
That there's a lot of people that show up to the event and they want to put the best version of their game forward. And so I know that there were some folks like editing player aids the night before and trimming off things to like recenter them and, because they really want the best version of the game.
Guilty.
Well, sometimes sometimes your mom shows up and
It
yeah.
was actually funny. Yeah, my mom's like a retired now, but professional like typesetter. Like she worked at like
Yeah.
a printing house like in her youth. And I showed her and Bridget, my wife, the game I was going to present. Um, and they had some feedback about the game, but also specifically
Yeah.
about the player aids. So I had this picture of my mom like going through it with like a red pen and like, well, I guess I'm
Yeah.
changing this last
Well, and
minute.
ironically, I think this brings us to a good first point about being a
Yeah.
playtester.
One thing,
Number
the first
one
thing
is
to
when
think
you're
about.
playtesting a game, it's almost never useful to give like graphic design feedback and like, oh, the art should be like this or that's all going to be handled so much further down the line. Sometimes it's useful. Like I played a game in the second half of the day and I just kind of forgot some of the rules because maybe they were in the wrong place. That kind of stuff's useful. But when you're just playing a game really early on in its development, that kind of stuff is sort of to the side. And I've had people say, I don't really like the art when it's just clip art. And it's, yeah.
Yeah, right. It's amazing the disparity, I guess, that exists between the highest end of
Definitely.
prototypes that exist at and like the lower end.
Sure.
Not saying anything about the quality of those designs, but I played one game that was like literally looked like it had just come off of the shelf set pieces, a board game cafe with like amazing
Totally. Yeah.
deluxe components. It's called. I'll give a shout out to the designer Anne, based in St. Louis, who has this game called Kells, which was very fun, and like her prototype is
Yeah. Yeah.
just
Yeah.
amazing. It looks fantastic, chunky cardboard bits. Everything is really nice. And then I played that, and then the next game I played was Mike's
Mm-hmm.
game
Mm-hmm.
from Elf Creek Games, and his was literally
With
like a
pencil.
whiteboard that had just had
Totally.
black Sharpie on it. And we were like writing in Sharpie like
Yeah.
rules on the board.
Right.
Both games were fun, and that and both totally fit in to that thing, but they're just so
And I think
different.
that that's like part of what Jamie has in mind, or what he envisioned initially, is that people would come and just do whatever they needed playtest wise. And I remember at one of our playtests, him telling you like at design day, why don't you try this and then try that and then try that? And for a lot of designers, yourself included, that is not their mindset. It's not like let me keep
Yeah.
tweaking and play around game. It's a little more like a showcase to try to see like what does the public think of my top version, my best look at the game.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's just because of the fact that, like, I get the opportunity to put this in front of people that are
Mm-hmm.
not biased
True. Right.
for kind of, like,
Yeah.
the first
Yeah. Yeah.
time ever, right? I mean, I think there's, like, a good camaraderie just by being at design day where everybody general is predisposed generally to say, like, "I like this about the game," before they start in with, like, being critical, um, because everybody wants each other to, like, succeed and have a good experience. So,
Yeah.
that notwithstanding, if I'm testing with you and Jamie and Pete, like,
Mm-hmm.
we're all friends, so there's that level of like, if you tell me like this game is like really cool and like, maybe it could still get improved, but it's
Sure.
publishable or whatever. That feels different than like a group of four strangers being like, can I get
Yeah.
on the email list
Right.
for when this gets
Well, and
published?
I think another interesting point to touch on is the rating scale at Design Day, because this has changed over time. And, what have you, I don't know if you ever were on the original one, which was actually just the BGG rating system. But now it's a six
Yeah.
point scale. You want to describe that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't have it like in front of me, but it's
Sure.
basically a scale from 1 to 6 where I think 6 is like fun, functional, and balanced are kind of like the key criteria.
Yeah.
It's like fun, functional, intuitive, and balanced or something like that.
Hmm.
And then a
Yeah.
5 would be like missing one of those components, and a
Yeah,
4
I've got
is
it up here. I'll tell you.
okay, yeah, that would
So
be
you're
helpful.
you're you're bang on. Number six is functional, fun, intuitive, and balanced. And one is the core concept needs work. And then two is like solid core concept, reinforcing mechanisms need work. And three is functional mechanisms, not quite fun yet. And I feel like there's a lot of games that I played there where you're sort of like, oh, there is a mechanic here that could be cool, but you haven't found the fun. And that's like a totally reasonable place to be. But when you tell someone their game is a 3 out of 6, it kind of feels bad.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And and so anyway, from there it's sort of like functional and fun, but the rules aren't intuitive, and then it's functional, fun, and intuitive, but the balance needs work, and then it's sort of complete. So the whole system is kind of like, where are you in terms of being finished? But it also suggests a certain linear order to how that finish is going to happen, and that can be a little awkward. Like when I
Yeah,
had Stamp Swap there last
like
year too, yeah, go ahead.
I would say, like, yeah, like a 3 is probably where most prototypes are
Right.
living on just like any game that somebody's
Sure.
working on. Because
Exactly.
if the
Yeah.
game is core gameplay works and it's fun, it's like that's
That's
what we're
awesome.
all going
That's
for.
great. I think you can sign a game that's there,
Yeah.
right? And then everything else is development.
I think I'll
But
like
yeah.
my main feedback about this rating scale, and I think we actually just used this on
Oh,
the
okay.
first Decision Space
Space Jam.
design Space Jam. I think we
Yes.
use this, and I think we switch it up a little bit in the second one, which is going on now. Quick plug for that. If you're
Yeah.
interested, you or any of our listeners, in trying out like 18 really cool 18 card games, so like these micro
Nice.
games, those are available to be printed and played in the Discord now. I have one up, um, and they're really cool. And it's
Is
been
it a 3
awesome.
right now? Is yours a 3 out of
I
6
think
at
mine
the
is
moment?
exactly a 3 out of 6 right
Nice.
now.
Perfect. It's a
Yeah.
good place to be,
Yeah, it's a good place to be.
Yeah.
But I think my feedback for that particular rating scale would be, I think I would take out balance from that. Like, you're
Sure.
just not going to know if a game is balanced if you play it one time. And I think that goes for any game.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I think that the rating scale suggests a sort of linear progress that
Right.
ends in balance. And sometimes it's easier, I mean, maybe just for me, but it's easier to know earlier, like, this scheme is balanced because the mechanisms are self-balancing, right? Like raw is balanced even if the tile set is totally further out of whack,
That's a great
because the
point.
mechanisms are self-balancing. So
I
it's
kind
just
of
kind of a
think
weird finishing
it'd
point.
be cool if fun was the final destination. Because guess what?
Right.
Like, if a game is like really super fun, I actually
Usually
don't care about
successful.
anything else about it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like,
The other thing that I have experienced is, like, when I had Stamp Swap there, I sort of knew going in that it was going to sort of meet all those conditions, because I knew that the design did the things that it was supposed to do, and you could play it, and all that stuff. But there was no room above that to say, like, this game is special, or I really love this game, or I would buy this game. And I feel like that would be useful too, you
yeah,
know?
that'd be cool
And as
too. Like, if this game was for sale, would you buy
right.
it? And then
Yeah.
maybe like, here, you could like give this person your email address or something like
Exactly.
that.
Exactly.
Because that
So
would,
I think
yeah,
maybe if, and this goes to another point about playtesting as a designer, is maybe in the future I would just have my own additional feedback form that says those kinds of questions,
things to think about. Number two, yeah,
Yeah.
kind of like, what is your scale that you would like for your game to be graded on? Because
Right, right, right.
also built into well, you get, I guess it's not really built in, but the way everybody uses their time is they play the game, or as much of the game as they want,
Right.
and then save 10 or 15 minutes for feedback from the group, and that's great.
Yeah,
And you could ask anything that time. You could ask them to
totally.
do anything, and people were, in my experience, in all the games I tested and the ones in my sessions where I presented, like, wanted to give you the full time to
Hmm.
think about so yeah, you could present them with anything. So I had a couple of, like, for myself, I had a couple of like specific questions,
Yeah.
but I didn't have anything beyond just kind of like, I didn't have that sort of like criteria in mind of like, where on this scale what am I going for? Because it's,
Yeah.
one person might be like, I know this game's balanced, but do people find it fun? Where somebody else would be coming in with a different end goal of like, do people feel like this game is fair? Does it feel fair
Yeah.
to you?
Yep. Yeah.
Um,
Well, as a teacher, I grading is one of the things, and rating, is one of the things I've thought so much about, and I could take this entire hour talking about it. But I will give you, like, a little bit of perspective from the publisher side of how I evaluate games when I get pitched, or I get a sell sheet, or I'm talking to somebody about it. And also as a designer when I'm trying to, like, get feedback. So One of the things that I like to do, and our friend Pete will know this, I don't know if you know this, is I like to rate things on a 1 to 3 scale.
Yeah, your
Are you
famous
familiar
1
with
to
this,
3
Dave?
scale,
The
yeah.
famous 1 to 3. And an important point about the 1 to 3 scale is it's 1, 2, or 3 out of 3. Um, and so, like, I played this game for Elf Creek, and I had people play it, and I got some general feedback, and then I just said, 1, 2, or 3 out of 3, and somebody said, "Well, it's like a 2.5," and I don't want to hear that. And I said, "You're gonna have to pick," and he said, "Yeah, I go 3 out of 3," and then the other guy said 2 out of 3. But when you're committing to giving something a 3 out of 3, you're committing to say this thing is good.
Yeah.
You're not saying it's fine. You're not saying I'd play it again, but you're actually saying like that's a good game. And I thought that was really useful. But I also followed it up by saying, would you both give it a 3 out of 4? And they were like, yes. And I think you can find like scales that are kind of suitable to get you the information you want, and sort of 10 points is often too wide, too much resolution to get anything useful out of.
I
Um,
it's funny that you say that, because that's one thing I struggle a lot just in the ratings that we do on this show. And we always
yeah,
we put the ratings at the very beginning, to kind of clue people in that this is actually like not the thing that we think is ultimately
sure.
providing value, as opposed to a lot of other podcasts where they like the final verdict is
That's
the
the
rate
thing.
that,
Yeah, right, right.
which puts it in a position where you're like, this is the important bit. And it does feel like 10, we just use the BGG scale because people are
Sure.
familiar with it, but it feels like 10 is too much. And we end up, as a result, giving a ton of games things right around 7,
Of course, of course.
7,
And
7 to
no
8.
one wants to commit to a 10. So
Yeah.
why does your scale even go to 10?
I'll do 10s. I do 10s.
You
So
do
that's,
10s. You
yeah.
do 10s.
But yeah, right. It is kind of funny. Like on Board Game Geek, like the vast majority of the games
Oh,
are
yeah.
living between 6 and 9, right?
$100. Right.
Probably like 95% of the games on there.
Yeah. It's like a style of grade inflation. That's funny. Which I also think this is part of what made your Feld tier list episode so compelling or useful or clear, is that, you don't have 9, you have like 5, right?
Hmm.
And you must choose, is it an A or an S? There's not an A minus tier. There's not a B over C tier, and I think that that is a useful way to frame thinking about things.
Yeah.
And if I'll commit to today being a 3 out of 3 day for me personally, then I'm telling myself it's a good day.
So I think maybe the thing to think about as we kind of like hone in on a few different things to think about in playtesting games here, if I'm hearing you correctly, would be like try to figure out what scale is suitable for you
Yeah,
and ask people that. You don't just
yeah,
have to go with 1 to 10 because that's what everybody uses, or or Board
totally.
Game Geek, or 1 to 6 because that's what the external structure of the event you're
Exactly.
participating
Yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah. And I think that that is a really key point for designers as they bring a game to the table, is like, what am I hoping to see today? Like,
Yeah.
what's the thing I'm actually trying to test? Is it that I want to, the game's at this point and I want to see the numbers? Or, in my game, there's a very specific mechanism where in one game, you had 2 tiles in front of you every turn and you drew up at the end of your turn. And the other time, you didn't have tiles in front of you and you drew a fresh one at the start of the turn, because I wanted a very specific type of decision. And so I just asked them that question about, like, how did that feel? There's a certain dynamic I described to them where they're deciding between the face up ones or digging for these unknown face downs. And did they experience that? And it gives your playtesters a chance to be especially helpful to you, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, people I let's talk a little bit about the feedback you might receive as a person presenting games, or on the other side, the feedback you
Yeah.
might give. And
Yep.
so I was on both sides of that yesterday, and I think maybe the thing to think about there is to be, I think, as the person receiving feedback, you had kind of have to be like ruthless in what you choose to accept and what you
Mm-hmm.
choose to ignore.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that
Totally.
is because you might not know this, but I minored in creative writing in undergrad, which I loved. And the way a lot of those classes are structured is you would bring in a piece of writing, and maybe you read it, or maybe you read the class reads your writing ahead of the class, and then
Yeah.
you're basically just on the hot seat and you just
Totally.
sit there while everybody goes around the
Rips it.
table and rips it to shreds.
Yeah.
And over, years of doing these kind of classes in that structure, the thing you learn is that like you're going to get a ton of great advice in these classes, and you're also get a ton of terrible advice and
Hmm.
feedback about, and like I think it really becomes a skill to figure out like what is good and useful advice to you, and what it can you just be okay saying I accept all of this feedback is
Right.
coming from the best intentions and it's genuine feedback from a good place, but that doesn't mean it's all useful to me
Totally. And
at
I
that
think
time.
it's a lesson to learn that you don't have to respond to everything that they say, right? And I think a lot of designers, especially when they feel like their design is good or their design is close, will take your play experience and tell you that it is wrong,
Yeah.
that you misunderstand the balance, or the game wasn't broken. It's just that other players should have done this and they didn't. And, so they start to become defensive about the design, and that's really not a good way to be probably as a designer. So
Yeah.
when I
I
get feedback that I don't
100%
want, I just
did
kind of
that.
don't respond. I just say like, okay, that makes, I appreciate that, and then
Yeah.
ask the question that I want.
Yeah. I did 2 sessions and one of them went horribly, I would say,
Hmm.
charitably. Maybe not horribly, maybe that's too strong. Like, but it was just
Sure.
not what I wanted to have
Yeah.
happen,
It's
which
like
was
being a stand-up comic, and then
yeah.
you just what do they call that? You crash. You just
It's kinda like crashing. Like, I could kinda tell the
yeah,
vibe was off, like, right away. Fortunately, the other session went, like, great, and I had kind of exactly what I had hoped would happen did
yeah,
happen. Um, and, without belaboring, like, kinda how the game works, you're familiar with it.
I am.
Um, like, the game ended as quickly as it possibly could, which meant that players kind of weren't is exactly what you said. Like, I felt
Yeah,
like people weren't really, like, engaging in the mechanisms in, like,
right.
a strategic way, and
Hmm.
then people ended the game with, like, 0 points,
Yeah,
and then we're kind of like, "This doesn't feel good." And I was just like, "Well, why did you
right.
like,
Why did this happen?
why didn't you,
Yeah,
like, do the things that the game is, like, trying to get you to do?" Um,
for sure.
and it was, I mean, genuinely, like, I got feedback to talk about it, and I definitely probably adopted like too defensive of a posture
Mm.
because
Hmm.
I felt like that the playtest was in some way like messed up or
Yeah,
fluked.
like invalid somehow, or
Yeah,
yeah, totally.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think both things are kind of like true. Like
Hmm.
it's like if some of the feedback is like directed at like this kind of like weird play that maybe isn't feedback that I then want to like
Sure.
change the game around.
Right.
But at the same time, if people are feeling like something isn't working right, then they might not be diagnosing exactly what the problem is, but they're
Right.
probably identifying that there is a
Yeah, they're telling
problem.
you some symptom that
Something
you can
is up.
decide to treat or not, right? Like Root has this sort of problem where if the table doesn't smash the leader or something, then they're just going to run away and win, and maybe it's not fun.
Right.
So you kind of have these fragile games. One of the games I tested, which was from Ben Rossett, who I think is just an amazing designer. He did Search for Planet X. He did
Oh, no way.
from
I didn't know he did Search for Planet X.
Oh yeah, and Lost Species and
Oh, that's cool.
Fromage, which is coming out, and this other game which is called The Game Makers. Um, they are three unbelievable time track games. This one basically had nonstop simultaneous play, and it has this engine building and contract fulfillment. And the contract fulfillment's the timer. And I was trying to explain that like I could just engine build the whole game and someone could end the game and it would just be a horrible time for me. And so, and it's like, well, that's bad play. And I think it's a big design challenge to create a game that has a high enough strategic, ceiling that it can be played well without entering too much into the possibility that it can be played absolutely horribly.
Yeah.
And I think that happens a lot. And it's just, that's fine. You just have to know like what kind of a game experience are you going to put on the table for people, right? If you could play Azul like just absolute crap and just have a horrible, miserable time, that would probably be bad because Azul's really kind of light and entry, but it doesn't work that way. And Root is not the same as Azul, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I actually play tested a game with Ben, not knowing
Yeah.
that he was
Okay.
the designer of Search for Planet X.
Yeah.
I did because I like kind of sat down at the table and they were like talking about one of Ben's like published designs. So I did
Hmm.
have that context that he was like a published designer.
Yeah.
And we played this game. It was Mike's game again,
Okay. Yeah.
and I felt like I had some like really insightful things to say that I like jotted down in my notebook. I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm
Yeah.
gonna like tell Mike this after the game, and he's gonna be like, wow, Jake's so smart. And it was kind of validating because like Ben identified the same areas I did, but then his solutions were just like so much better than mine. So I was like, okay, I
Yeah.
don't actually need to say anything.
That's funny.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's man. I was so
I was
impressed, and
really
he's
yeah.
also he's the head of HR for Panda Game Manufacturing, and he's between two cities, between two castles of Mad King Ludwig. Like he's been there, man, and he's
That's cool.
sharp
That's
fella.
cool.
Yeah,
Anyway, back to my game. I
yeah,
think I didn't really figure this out at the time of like what the negativity that people are, what the thing was bad that people were responding
sure,
to.
sure.
But I think I figured out like in hindsight, which was really helpful.
Hmm.
And I think it was this, which was so my game is a murder mystery themed set collection game with like the set collection needs to be in bold because
Yeah.
it seemed what had happened and based on like the feedback I got afterwards was that the players came to the game expecting it to be game that had like deduction elements, right? They were like trying
Mm,
to do deduction in
that's
the
interesting.
game instead of set collecting. And then
Hmm.
they get to the game end of the game and then, and it's like and they're like we didn't feel like the deduction was
Right,
satisfying and I'm like
right,
but
right.
why didn't you collect any
Uh,
sets? you know
Yeah, and it's
and
it's it's absolutely not a deduction game. I think one of the things that you've pitched in our play tests that makes this clear is like for those that don't know, this is a game about Hercule Poirot, the world's greatest detective from Agatha Christie. And one thing you said is like Poirot is going to solve the mystery. You are not, but you're these detectives trying to sort of follow on his heels and be a part of it. And I think that makes it more clear. Like you're not here to solve this mystery.
you're almost like taking on the role of like the reader, right? Like you're trying to figure out
Right.
what the solution is going to be, but like the
But Poirot
solution
gonna
is
do. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So that was just I mean that was interesting and I think like what that gave me feedback on is like maybe it's not that the game is broken with the rules as is, but that like I need to be really clear in the way I present it, whether that's in the rule book or in the teach. And I did a way better job of so this might be another thing to think about
Yeah.
going to I think this is thing like number 4 here, Paul,
Yeah, we might be
which
on four here.
which is like and I'm curious your thought. Maybe you'll disagree,
Okay.
but like it is okay to be more directive in your
Yeah.
teach of your prototype than you would want to do for like your game night game. Because I think in the first game, I kind of did the teach like this was the game we're playing at a game night. Yeah, I don't want to like say what the
Sure.
strategy is. I want them to
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
discover the strategy for themselves. But in the second game, I was like, here's a common pitfall that could happen to you.
Sure.
Like if you accelerate towards the end of the game and you don't have any points, you have not collected any sets, like that might be a bad strategy because the game could end and you'll have 0
Yeah.
points,
Yeah.
and like just different things like, there's like a mechanic where you're trying to fill up rows. So it's like if you fill up the road to 3, that gives the next person like the opportunity to complete the row for like big
Yep.
advantage. Just kind of like spelling things out in a way was
Yeah. I
really
think there.
really helpful in that
Yeah.
playtest. But it felt a little awkward because like if you're just learning a game at game night, you probably don't want the teacher to be like telling you the implication of different things. I don't know
Yes.
your thoughts.
No, I think you're right. I think that there is 100% a time to guide the play and sort of suggest the things that they pay attention to because it goes back to knowing like what are you trying to get out of this playtest.
Right.
And it's not a blind playtest, right? You're not handing them a rule book and asking them to read it and infer everything. And if you were, you might put some of those strategy tips in your rule book, right? But this is not that level of user experience. And there might be parts that you want them to do. And sometimes I'll say, like when we were playtesting Periodic, we had someone on staff at Genius Games named Shelly, and Shelly, her whole job each game was to try to rush this one part of the game. And so it's not a strategic play. We're just like, we're stress testing this module to see if it's busted, if it's out of balance with everything. And that's fine. You can have play tests like that. Our friend Peter is way on the side of guiding the plays. And I think it's, again, partly because he wants those plays to go well. And
when you're
also
talking
because
about
Guy, yes. And
okay.
Keep in mind, friend of the podcast had the top rated game last year, Crits and Tricks, and had another game this year that was taken by a publisher and maybe will end up published. But he goes way on the side of telling you things about the game and pointing out strategies and
making it
sort
fun.
Yeah, exactly. And like fleshing out the thematic world of that game, which makes it fun for those players. And I think also he's a teacher, so he leans into teaching it well and that kind of stuff. And that is totally valid. But there's also times, and I know he got this feedback, where people were like, if you weren't telling us to do this and this and that, I don't think I would have caught it. And I think we might not have flipped that card over and the game might have stumbled. And you just need to be aware as a designer that that's something you need to watch for.
Yeah.
And you need to sort of balance those two, I think.
It is tough too, because like there's times when you're like, your game so well,
Right.
and then you're like watching them play this game and they're missing kind of like an obvious play or doing
Yeah.
something that's just like objectively doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's hard to know when should you step in or not. And I think
Right.
you could go too far on the other end. So I think that also was part of the first play test I had. People were doing things like that were not advancing their position in the game.
Right.
And then at the end of the game, we get to scoring. They're like, "Oh, I didn't realize this like crucial rule for like
Sure.
scoring." And so
Yeah.
I kind of like in hindsight, I should have said like the first time that happened, like, "Hey, I just want to make sure like remembers that like cards in your hand will also score at the end of the game."
Yeah, that's true. And there are a couple of rules, having played this a couple times, that are important that I typically forget. That one being one of them, and like trying to get a complete case being another one. And those are big benchmarks.
Yeah.
Like you need to know that about scoring.
Yeah. But in like I really emphasized it. And still, knowing that I could have done, I should have like, that could have been a good thing to like just flag in the middle of the game.
Exactly.
So anyway, that's kind of like,
that's cool.
Figure out where you want to be in regard to like being an active playtester. And there's definitely a time and place for both. I think,
and I think it's super useful that you did both.
Yeah,
because
totally.
you see that like
when people get it, the strategic implication of the things, like they can have a really fun experience with it.
And then part of your design challenge becomes like, for a blind playtest, how do I put enough in the rule book in just the right way, with just the right graphic design to highlight it so that they catch on to what I'm saying fast enough to like have a good first play, because that does matter.
That's huge. Yeah, totally.
Right. Yeah, that does matter. Should we talk about any of the specific games that we played? Do you want to get into the little nitty gritty of some cool designs?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to kind of like, so I played this game Kells, which is about the Book of Kells in Ireland. And I have to
illuminated manuscript.
I have to disclose a positive bias that I mentioned on a previous episode that we got a recent review from this designer.
Oh,
so that made me happy. But this game was really I think I'm trying to think what I want to say about this game, like without going to the like depths of like how it plays.
This game was up on Tabletop Edison in their like competition. So I think a lot about the previous version has been widely publicized. And knowing Anne, she and I have worked on a co-design. I don't think she'll be frustrated to hear us talk about her game.
No, I know. I'm not thinking. I'm just trying to think like without like going into like the whole rules speech. The thing about this game that's like super awesome and very smart, I think, is that it's like a tile placement game where you're putting tiles on your board in a pattern, and then there's like embellishment tiles that you're putting on top of the tiles that spatially relate to the other tiles you've placed,
Oh,
which is sweet. So it's like you got this like little head and foot pattern that like relate to other tiles. So you have to like match the head and the foot, and then everything in between them you kind of like want to be a matching thing to like maximize your
that's
point.
interesting.
So it's really cool, kind of like min max gameplay. Very fun. And I think for like the design feedback piece of this, I think this game is in the like category of games that are like 95% there,
Yep.
and it's just about like what is, what if anything can we change to make the gameplay better?
Yeah.
And like, so like all the rule and in this one was maybe like more, so a lot of games right in that final editing process would be about like how can we like streamline this? Like how can we
Hmm.
like keep all the fun stuff and make it like as intuitive and easy to play as possible?
Yep.
And I think
Yep.
that's like where this game needs is like that's the prior that was where my feedback was is like, can we like combine some of these steps so that instead of
Sure.
and even like as much as like there was like some like terminology that was used
Uh-huh.
that perhaps
Yeah,
like
that's a little
didn't.
inside and sort of hard to follow
Yeah,
or like
like, do we actually
remember.
need, like, a special term for the tiles that we played this turn, or can we just, like, know
Right.
though we can move tiles that we are playing this turn,
Yeah,
without, like,
that
there
makes
being,
sense.
like, the terminology that these are, like, wet paintings?
Sure, sure, sure. That's cool. It sounds like you would give this a 3 out of 3, but maybe a 5.5 out of 6.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Did I get it bang on? Did you go 5.5?
Um, I didn't
You don't know.
do,
You don't know.
I didn't do any point fives,
Okay, so
so
you
I
went 5.
think I think I did a 5, yeah.
Okay.
I was,
Hey,
like, between
good
but
job.
I was between 5 and 6.
Yeah. Not technically. 5 is that's it's on 5, but yeah.
Yeah. And
Um,
yeah, right. And I think it was like for, trying to like do diligence with like the thing. I hope Anne's not disappointed that I got a 5 instead of 6. It was just like the only part where it stumbled at all for me was like kind of like the intuitiveness. And I
yeah.
felt like once we got that down and a little more streamlined, then there'd be like a little less downtime, and that would be like
Yeah.
6 out of 6 right there.
Yeah, but I have sort of 2 points on that I think from my own playtesting experience. One, as a publisher, there's no right answer to where to take it from where Kells currently is. And it's
Right.
going to be specific to whatever their product needs are. Like they just might want to hit a different price point or literally shrink components or something like that. And so I towards the end of my playtesting of Honey Buzz, Royce Banuelos, who was a St. Louis game designer for a long time and an important guy in the start of my like career. We played Honey Buzz at one of the meetups, and he just said, "Look, man, I think it's done. Like, just pitch it, and like they'll tell you what they want to do with it, and you can keep making small changes, but it's not going to dramatically change what this is."
Yeah.
And which I thought was useful because you have to sort of decide when you're done, right? And the other piece of feedback, which is one of my favorite playtesting stories, and we'll see what your listeners think of it. The very, very first time that I got Honey Buzz on a tabletop with hand cut paper tiles and pencil and everything, we played it at this Panera, and just me and Royce. And I don't know if we played the whole game or not, but then I was like, "So what'd you think, man?" And his feedback was, I think that if I just bought that game and I played it, I'd probably throw it in the trash. That was the extent of what he had to say. And first of all, it was completely deflating
Yeah, that is
in
hard.
a big way, but also, and Royce is sort of blunt in this way, but it also, I think I appreciated this sort of frankness of that because it just sort of pushed the discussion immediately past, is it good or bad?
Right.
And then just got straight to like, here's kind of a direction. Here's the stuff I like, or here's the stuff that I don't like, so that you're not waiting to hear like, okay, that was good, that was bad. And you're like, oh, but did they like it? Did they not
Right.
like it?
Right.
What score are they going to give? And I think that's, that can be useful. Sometimes I try to tiptoe around it with games that maybe aren't that good, but
Yeah. People
yeah, I
can
thought that
also
was cool.
tell. Like
Sure.
I hear people talk, if you listen to feedback, you could probably glean whether or not people like the game anyway. So I
Yeah.
think there is
Yeah.
some value of being like, and just kind of like cutting through that. that
Yeah.
being said, I've shared on this show before that I once got feedback. I honestly didn't enjoy anything about this game. It's like, okay,
Cool.
okay, like I don't know really where
Yeah,
to go from there.
exactly. And I'll say, as a playtester too, even on games that I really didn't enjoy. And I say, like, I played a game there that it was a 6 player. There was no player interaction. The turns were simple, but took kind of a long time. It was sort of like 4 minutes between turns, and it was missing some of the stuff. But even in a playtest like that, where basically everyone is saying, here are problems, here's balance issues, I found some little busted loop, and, throwing out a million possibilities, I still try to go back and just say, like, something I really did like was this. I think that that's cool. And I think if you focus the design on that, I'd really like it, because, it except when you're playing one of Jake Freeman's early prototypes, it's
Yeah,
very rare that you can say there's nothing I enjoyed about this game.
that's right. Yeah,
That's
that
right.
is a
That's my
distinction.
understanding anyway.
It
Yeah.
I honestly think, like, you would have to it would be we're here because we love games, right? And, like,
Yeah.
playing
Yeah.
games. I think it'd be pretty tough for me to come away from any games, no matter how rough of a prototype or how much, like, that type of game is not for me. Like, I played an
Yep.
abstract game that was
Yeah.
very cool, felt really polished, but it's just not my thing. Like, I'm not really.
Was this Bump It Up?
This was Bump It Up,
I
yeah.
was about to bring this up because I think we both played this game, and you're right. Like, the design was so slick and clean and elegant and simple. It's something you could teach really anybody in no time and play, and probably not that exciting to either of us. It's not the style of game we would design. It's not the style of game we would buy, right? But we're still able to sort of give good feedback, right?
Right, and yeah, and feel like this is like, I could tell there's these aspects of this game that are working very well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that one kinda reminded me of, like, I felt like that should be I could see that being, like, on the table at, like, a coffee shop almost, or something, like,
Yes.
almost like in, like, wooden components or something, like the
Right.
pegboard game or something like that.
Right. Yeah, it's
Like,
something like that. It has a classic feel to it.
yeah,
Yeah. That was a cool design.
um,
I like that one a lot.
yeah. Yeah,
Let's see.
the other thing about feedback too is in several of my playtests. Okay, so I played this game that was it was heavily inspired. Well, it was interesting because it had very similar mechanics as Arcs, where you had trick taking, or like Jiraku, or Brian Boru, where you have trick taking,
Okay.
and the better your card in trick taking, the fewer actions you get to take,
Okay.
and the different
Right.
suits are like related to different
That's
actions.
like arcs, right?
It's very similar to Arcs, yeah. I think the design study hadn't played Arcs, but like was well aware of it.
Okay.
And anyway, there was basically one of the. I think we had a really good feedback session where the designer was like specifically interested in getting feedback on one of these actions. Or I think he had asked, like, were there any of the actions that like weren't fun and exciting to you, to the group? And there was like one thing that it was like on its own like auxiliary board. I didn't interact with it at all, and people were
Mhm.
kind of had some questions about it. And one person suggested, like, oh, this could be, instead of like this board, it could be like a bunch of different cards with like personal
Mhm.
player powers that would like cycle through, or you could buy. And and a lot of the table was like, or I don't know, maybe like two of the players were like, that sounds really cool, and I was like, for me, I would not like that
Mhm.
at all.
Yeah.
So which is just kind of reminds you too that every playtester you have is coming in with their own set of like
Totally.
biases and
A
preferences. And that was
hundred
something I
percent.
noticed come up in a couple of my things, where I was going to say, or I say something to somebody's like, I disagree with that. Like, I actually loved how this was working,
Mhm.
or vice versa, right? Where it's just like, I think this should be less restrictive. And it's like, well, I actually thought it should be more restrictive, or
Mhm.
it's like, okay,
Yeah,
as
and
a designer, you're kind of like, well, I don't know, I don't know if you should take one
sure.
perspective or another. Maybe that means it's in a good place, but
Yeah, we sort of, in the gaming world, we sometimes convince ourselves, because we're making numerical arguments and we're looking at balance and this kind of stuff, that, like, this is the correct viewpoint, that the game would be better if this. And it is not true. It is rarely the case that any statement about what makes a game better or not is true. People like the things that they like, and game design is a deeply aesthetic practice. And it's like, it is connected to math, but it is also connected to play. And I've said this before, but like tic-tac-toe is a killer game for a 5-year-old. That thing is so good. They'll play it and they'll play it and they'll play it at the restaurant over and over and over and over. And, you know, at some point they move beyond that, but it doesn't mean that tic-tac-toe is not a game because it's good. It doesn't have the strategic depth. It's just like, well, that's not where I am, you know. And you're going to have playtesters that'll tell you that, like, I give Peter feedback all the time about the direction I wish he would take his game in, and Peter inevitably takes it in the dead opposite direction because of the style of game that he wants to make. And that makes sense. You know, he's not designing for me. And I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody there who's works for a game publisher about this very thing about, like, you know, I think they're talking about, like, you know, trying to publish, you know, good games, which makes a lot of sense for a game publisher. You know, and I kind of made the comment, was like, you know, like, it's tough because it's like, of course games are subjective. And he was like, no, it's actually objective. It just comes down to like how much money, you know, you make for the game. And I was like, okay, that is an objective metric. That's a good point. But if somebody says, you know, if you say game's not good and somebody else says, I love that game, they're not wrong.
Correct.
About it.
They're not inaccurate about their feelings. That is their taste about the game, you know? Yeah. You also mentioned something else that I think happens a lot at a playtest table, which is people come up with what they think are the issues, and they also come up with what they think are the solutions. And I know that this is something Jamie has said he doesn't like in his playtest feedback. He wants to be, as the developer, the person that resolves the issues, but you will have people that will, like you were saying about that deck of cards with player powers and stuff, they'll lock in on that being the solution, and the rest of their feedback, they're really just thinking
if we
about
do
how
that,
they could make
then
that work.
This could be a card that you use, and that would interact with this over here. And it's kind of like, okay, if we're not doing that, that's not going to be helpful feedback.
Yeah, and sometimes people just sort of pitch you a different game.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I just don't want to go that way.
Right. That was kind of happening with my playtest that was like a bit of a flop, where a lot of the feedback I got was like, how could this be a deduction game instead? Like, how would it be possible that we have the case solved at the start and then people are like peeking at cards, and then there's like a different end game trigger, you know, based on something else.
That's 100% a different game.
It's, you know, and it's like, yeah, that is a game that could exist, and it might be even worth trying. You know, maybe that's like a different direction to go in, but it would, that at that point, it's like, yeah, you're just starting almost over from scratch.
Yeah. I think we should probably wrap up soon, but I have kind of one last thing I want to say about both as a playtester, a designer, as a sort of publisher standpoint, which is when you're creating one of these products and you're testing one of these products and you're striving for it to be good in some sense. And this is especially from the publisher perspective. I always ask people, like, what is your favorite thing about this game? What is the thing you want this game to focus on? And what is the thing that other people are going to talk about after they play this game? Like, oh, you have to try Vector. It has this thing in it. And I know what that is for that Game Factory game, or the game makers. And I feel like I know that for all the games that I've designed. And I know that Stonemaier says they want a thematic hook and a mechanical hook and a component hook. And if you have a clear image for those, then you can check with your playtesters every time if they caught that, or if they didn't, or if you're landing that message or not. And that really pushes you towards like a focused play experience, and also a clearly communicable product design you can actually give to a publisher.
Yeah, that's really good feedback. And I think like and it's a hard thing too, because do you feel like you know that at the start of Honey Buzz or Stamp Swap, or is that something you like develop into?
It's partly the way that I design, which is I will say I am bad at putting kind of a half-baked idea on the table. Yeah. Because I sort of over theory craft, because I have a mathematics background. And, you know, like Honey Buzz started with this novel mechanism about the tile placement. And so I knew that was going to be, I was going to build around that hook. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of have that concept all along. Yeah. And Periodic was like the board is the periodic table. That's the game, right? Genotype. There's Punnett squares in the game, and you're doing dice to make, So I think that's really important, as opposed to falling into the trap of it's a worker placement game, and the tweak is that it's space dragons.
Right.
I think that doesn't. It's harder to get to the finish line with that sort of a vision and trying to just find something inside there.
Yeah, totally. I think that's such good feedback. And I think it's really tough too,
Oh, totally.
Totally hard to.
100%. I mean, yeah, design work is immensely emotionally taxing.
Yeah.
Right? You invest all this energy in trying to take something out of your brain and putting it on the table and have an emotional impact on other people's experience. And it's not going to work a lot of the time.
And we talk about how fragile the, magic circle that we play games
Yeah.
is in all the time. So,
Yeah.
just how much like it goes through the mirror and back a million times to get into some, the prism, right? And then it's in front of somebody and now it's like, wait, it's not working the way it was when I did it in my brain.
Yeah.
And that's tough. But anyway, that's also what makes it so satisfying when it does hit and you come up with a great product at the end, like Stamp Swap, like Honey Buzz, and your other games, which
No
people
question.
should definitely check out if
Speaking of playtests, head over to the Decision Space Discord, check out the Decision Space Jam, play test those puppies, and give some good feedback. I recommend the 1 to 3 scale, but that gets there to go in 1 to 6.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah. So you could find our Discord and other things about the show at decisionspacepodcast.com. Thank you so much, Paul, for joining. Thank you everyone for listening. And we'll see you next week with a deep dive review. Brendan will be back about Bruno Cathala's 5 Tribes. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great week.
Adios.
Bye, y'all.